Welcome to True Crime Vault, where we delve deep into the most shocking and complex cases that shake communities to their core. Today, we uncover the story of Marcus Thompson, a brilliant investigative journalist whose pursuit of truth in Atlanta's prestigious religious community led to his brutal demise. Marcus Thompson was 34 years old when he died, a tall, athletic man with keen brown eyes and an infectious smile that put people at ease. Living in the affluent suburb of Roswell, Georgia, he had built a reputation as one of Atlanta's most fearless journalists, known for exposing corruption in powerful institutions. His modern townhouse on Riverside Drive, with its sleek furniture and walls adorned with journalism awards, reflected his success and dedication to his craft. Born and raised in South Chicago, Marcus had worked his way through Northwestern University's prestigious Medill School of Journalism, graduating with honors in 2011. His colleagues at the Atlanta Chronicle described him as meticulous and passionate, always willing to dig deeper than others dared. Marcus had this way about him, recalls Sarah Chen, his editor at the Chronicle. He could get people to open up, to trust him with their darkest secrets. It was like he carried this aura of safety around him. In the months leading up to his death, Marcus had been investigating Graceland megachurch, one of Atlanta's most prominent religious institutions. The church, a sprawling complex of modern buildings and manicured lawns in the heart of suburban Atlanta, served a congregation of over 15,000 members. Its main sanctuary, a gleaming structure of glass and steel, could seat 5,000 people, and its Sunday services were broadcast live across the Southeast. Pastor William Bill Montgomery, the charismatic leader of Graceland, had built the church from a humble congregation of 200 into a multi-million-dollar empire over 2 decades. At 55, with silver hair and piercing blue eyes, Montgomery cut an impressive figure in his tailored suits, preaching prosperity gospel to Atlanta's elite. His wife, Rebecca Montgomery, ran the church's extensive charitable foundation, and their 3 children held various leadership positions within the organization. The church reported annual revenues exceeding $50 million, with numerous community outreach programs, youth initiatives, and a private Christian academy. From the outside, Graceland appeared to be a model of modern Christian ministry, combining traditional values with contemporary appeal. Its membership included some of Atlanta's most influential families, from business leaders to political figures. Marcus had begun looking into Graceland's finances in early 2023, initially focusing on their real estate holdings and tax exemptions. What started as a routine investigation into church finances soon evolved into something far more complex. He spent countless hours reviewing public records, conducting interviews, and following paper trails that led to offshore accounts and shell companies. What few people knew was that Marcus had developed a close personal relationship with Pastor Montgomery. Their first meeting had occurred at a charity gala in late 2021, where Marcus had been covering the event for the Chronicle. Security camera footage from various Atlanta hotels would later reveal regular meetings between the 2 men, always in private suites, always booked under false names. In the weeks before his death, Marcus's behavior had changed noticeably. Colleagues reported him working late into the night, jumping at unexpected noises, and keeping his notes in encrypted files. He had recently installed a sophisticated security system in his home and begun varying his daily routines. Something was eating at him, remembers James Wilson, his next-door neighbor. He used to be so outgoing, always ready with a wave and a smile. But in those last weeks, he seemed distant, distracted. On March 12, 2023, just 3 days before his death, Marcus had attended Graceland's Sunday service, sitting quietly in the back row as Pastor Montgomery delivered a passionate sermon about truth and redemption. Security footage shows Marcus leaving immediately after the service, declining to participate in the usual social hour. That same evening, he made several phone calls to his editor and sent a series of encrypted emails to a secure server. The last person to see Marcus alive was his sister, Dr. Aisha Thompson, a cardiology resident at Emory University Hospital. They had dinner together on March 14 at Marcel's, an upscale steakhouse in Midtown Atlanta. He was nervous, Aisha would later tell detectives. He kept checking his phone, looking over his shoulder. He told me he was onto something big, something that could shake Atlanta to its core. But he wouldn't tell me what it was, said it was safer if I didn't know. What Marcus had uncovered would prove to be more explosive than anyone could have imagined. His investigation had gone beyond simple financial impropriety, revealing a complex web of secrets that threatened not just Graceland's reputation, but the foundations of Atlanta's religious and social establishment. His notes, scattered across various secure locations, would eventually expose years of carefully hidden sins within the congregation's highest ranks. The perfect facade of Graceland megachurch was about to crumble, but Marcus Thompson wouldn't live to see the impact of his work. On the evening of March 15, 2023, as the sun set over Atlanta's skyline, Marcus was putting the finishing touches on what would be his final story. Within hours, his pursuit of truth would cost him his life, triggering a chain of events that would expose the dark underbelly of privilege, power, and religious authority in the heart of the South. Little did the congregation know that their Wednesday evening prayer service would be the last time Pastor Montgomery would stand at his pulpit, his carefully crafted image of piety still intact. As church members raised their hands in worship, Marcus Thompson's laptop contained enough evidence to bring down not just their beloved pastor, but an entire network of corruption that had festered beneath Graceland's pristine surface for years. The stage was set for a story that would shock Atlanta's religious community and force its members to confront uncomfortable truths about faith, power, and the price of silence. Marcus Thompson's death would prove to be more than just another crime statistic. It would become the key that unlocked a Pandora's box of secrets, forever changing the landscape of religious authority in Atlanta. Stay with us as we unravel the complex web of relationships, secrets, and lies that led to this tragic end, and expose the truth that cost Marcus Thompson his life. This is just the beginning of our investigation into one of Atlanta's most shocking true crime cases. On March 15, 2023, at approximately 9:30 p.m., the peaceful evening on Riverside Drive was shattered by the sounds of breaking glass. James Wilson, Marcus Thompson's next-door neighbor, was watching a late-night cooking show when he heard the unsettling noise. Initially dismissing it as perhaps a fallen picture frame, Wilson's concern grew when he heard what sounded like a struggle followed by a muffled thud. Something just felt wrong, Wilson would later tell detectives. Marcus was usually quiet, especially at night when he was working. And these sounds, they weren't normal household sounds. Wilson, a retired high school principal who had lived in the neighborhood for 20 years, tried calling Marcus's cell phone. When there was no answer after 3 attempts, he decided to investigate. The night was unusually warm for March, with a light fog rolling in from the Chattahoochee River. Wilson approached Marcus's townhouse, noting that while the exterior lights were on as usual, the house seemed unnaturally dark inside. When he reached the front door, he noticed it was slightly ajar, the wooden frame splintered near the lock. "I called out Marcus's name," Wilson recalled, his voice trembling during the police interview. But there was this silence, this heavy silence that just felt wrong. Following his instincts, Wilson retreated to his home and dialed 911 at 9:47 p.m. The call was received by dispatcher Tracy Martinez, who immediately recognized the urgency in Wilson's voice. Roswell Police Department officers arrived at 9:53 p.m., led by Sergeant Keith Brown, a 15-year veteran of the force. The responding officers found the front door compromised and immediately called for backup. As they entered the home, their flashlights revealed signs of a violent struggle, overturned furniture, scattered papers, and broken glass from what appeared to be a shattered laptop screen. Marcus Thompson's body was discovered in his home office on the second floor. The scene was gruesome. Marcus lay face down near his desk, surrounded by pools of blood. Multiple wounds suggested he had been struck repeatedly with a heavy object, later identified as a distinctive bronze church award that had been displayed on his bookshelf. The award, ironically, was from a religious freedom association, recognizing excellence in faith-based journalism. Detective Sarah Martinez arrived at the scene at 10:15 p.m. A seasoned investigator known for her methodical approach and attention to detail, Martinez had worked some of Atlanta's most high-profile cases. At 42, with sharp brown eyes and prematurely graying hair, she had earned a reputation for solving cases that others deemed too politically sensitive. The moment I walked into that office, I knew this wasn't a random burglary gone wrong, Martinez would later write in her case notes. The scene was too specific, too personal. This was a message. The crime scene unit, led by forensic specialist Dr. Michael Chang, worked through the night. They documented evidence of a lengthy struggle that had begun in the hallway and culminated in the office. Blood spatter patterns suggested Marcus had tried to defend himself, and defensive wounds on his hands confirmed this theory. Several crucial pieces of evidence immediately stood out to investigators. 1. Marcus's laptop was missing, though its broken screen and keyboard fragments were scattered across the floor. The power cord was still plugged into the wall, suggesting the device had been violently ripped away. 2. A hidden USB drive was discovered behind a loose air vent cover, suggesting Marcus had anticipated trouble and taken precautions to protect sensitive information. 3. The home's sophisticated security system, installed just weeks earlier, had been professionally disabled. The digital recordings were corrupted, showing only static for the crucial hours surrounding the murder. 4. A burner phone was found in Marcus's desk drawer, containing only one number in its call history, traced to another burner phone that had been deactivated immediately after his death. The neighbors' interviews painted a picture of unusual activity in the hours leading up to the murder. Barbara Chen, who lived across the street, reported seeing a black SUV with tinted windows parked nearby for several hours that afternoon. I noticed it because it was just sitting there, engine running sometimes, she told detectives. In this neighborhood, people don't just sit in their cars. Another neighbor, Dr. Rachel Patel, reported seeing two well-dressed men in suits leaving Marcus's house around 7:30 p.m. They looked like business people, maybe church people, she noted. I wouldn't have thought anything of it, except they seemed to be arguing as they left. The investigation quickly revealed that Marcus's death had been carefully orchestrated. The killer had known exactly when he would be home and working alone. They had known how to disable his security system and where to find him in the house. Most importantly, they had known exactly what to take, his laptop and any obvious storage devices that might contain his investigative files. What the killer didn't know about was Marcus's paranoia in the weeks leading up to his death. He had begun making copies of everything, storing information in multiple locations and with multiple people. Marcus told me he was working on something big, his editor Sarah Chen revealed during questioning. He said if anything happened to him, I should look for a package at a specific storage facility. He made me memorize the location and unit number, wouldn't let me write it down. The medical examiner, Dr. James Foster, determined the time of death to be between 9:30 and 10 p.m. The cause of death was blunt force trauma, with the fatal blow striking the back of Marcus's head. The attack was brutal but precise, Dr. Foster noted in his report. The perpetrator knew exactly how much force to use. This wasn't a crime of passion, it was an execution. As dawn broke over Atlanta on March 16, Detective Martinez stood in Marcus's office, now a processed crime scene, and surveyed the evidence tags dotting the room. She knew this case would be different. The victim was no ordinary journalist, and the timing, just days before he was set to publish a major exposé, was too perfect to be coincidental. On Marcus's desk calendar, circled in red ink, was a date, March 18, 2023. Written beside it in his neat handwriting were 3 words that would guide the entire investigation: Graceland's Day of Reckoning. The next morning, as Detective Martinez began to dig deeper into Marcus's life and work, Pastor William Montgomery stood before his congregation at Graceland Megachurch, delivering a passionate sermon about forgiveness and redemption. None of his followers noticed the slight tremor in his hands as he gripped the pulpit, nor the beads of sweat forming on his forehead despite the cool air conditioning. The investigation was about to uncover a story far more explosive than anyone could have imagined, reaching into the highest echelons of Atlanta's religious and social elite. Marcus Thompson's murder was just the beginning of a scandal that would shake the foundations of one of the South's most powerful institutions. Stay with us as we continue to unravel this complex web of faith, power, and deadly secrets in our next segment, where we'll explore the hidden relationship that set these tragic events in motion. As Detective Sarah Martinez delved deeper into Marcus Thompson's life, a pattern began to emerge from the digital breadcrumbs he left behind. Hotel receipts, encrypted emails, and carefully documented financial transactions painted a picture of a relationship that had begun 2 years earlier at the Atlanta Christian Leadership Gala, where Pastor William Montgomery had been receiving a Lifetime Achievement Award. The gala, held at the St. Regis Atlanta on September 15, 2021, was a gathering of the city's religious elite. Marcus had been assigned to cover the event for the Atlanta Chronicle, expecting nothing more than a standard society piece. Security footage from that evening, retrieved by Detective Martinez, showed an unexpected moment: Pastor Montgomery approaching Marcus at the bar after the formal ceremonies had ended. There was something different about their interaction, recalled Sandra Pierce, a bartender working that evening. Most people approached Pastor Montgomery with this reverence, almost fear. But Marcus, he looked at him like he was seeing through all that, right into who the pastor really was. What began as an interview about church finances evolved into something more intimate. Hotel records revealed that 2 weeks after their first meeting, Pastor Montgomery booked a suite at the Four Seasons Atlanta under the name William Smith. Credit card statements showed room service for 2, and security footage captured Marcus entering the hotel 45 minutes after Montgomery. The level of planning was meticulous, Detective Martinez noted in her case files. They never arrived together, never left together. Everything was paid for in cash or through a series of shell companies we traced back to church donations. The relationship deepened over the following months. Through Marcus's hidden journal, discovered behind a loose brick in his garden wall, investigators learned that what started as physical attraction had evolved into something more complex. Marcus had become Pastor Montgomery's confidant, learning secrets about Graceland's operations that went far beyond their personal relationship. "I know I should maintain professional distance," Marcus wrote in an entry dated January 2022, "but there's something broken in Bill, something that mirrors the brokenness in this entire institution. He tells me things in the dark that he can't say in the light. The money, the manipulation, the ways they control people through shame and fear. It's all documented now." Financial records revealed a troubling pattern. Every time Marcus published a story that could have exposed church misconduct, large sums of money were transferred from Graceland's discretionary fund into offshore accounts. These accounts, Detective Martinez discovered, were linked to shell companies that then made deposits into Marcus's investment portfolio. It appears Pastor Montgomery was trying to buy silence, explained forensic accountant Dr. Lisa Wong. But what's interesting is that Marcus never touched that money. He documented every payment, every attempt at bribery, building a case that went far beyond their personal relationship. The USB drive found in Marcus's air vent contained hundreds of audio recordings. In one particularly damning conversation from February 2023, Pastor Montgomery could be heard discussing how the church manipulated its charitable giving numbers, the Haiti Project. "That money never left Atlanta," Montgomery's voice revealed. "We just move it through different accounts, make it look like we're doing God's work while building our own kingdom. Marcus, you don't understand, this is how all the major churches operate. The congregation needs to believe in something bigger than themselves." But Marcus had understood all too well. His notes revealed a systematic investigation into Graceland's finances, $12 million in charitable donations that never reached their intended recipients, property purchases made through shell companies, then leased back to the church at inflated rates. Youth program funds diverted to pay for private security to silence potential whistleblowers. Discriminatory hiring practices masked by carefully worded religious exemptions. Tax evasion schemes involving multiple offshore accounts. The relationship took a darker turn in early 2023 when Marcus discovered he wasn't the only one. His notes mentioned other young men, church employees, choir members, even some of the pastoral staff, who had been involved with Montgomery. But unlike Marcus, many had been paid for their silence with positions of power within the church hierarchy. Each Sunday, I sit in the back row and watch them all, Marcus wrote in his final journal entry, dated March 13, 2023. The youth pastor who was promoted after a special counseling session. The choir director who suddenly received a new car. The finance manager who got his position right after a weekend prayer retreat with Bill. They all carry the same shame in their eyes, the same forced smiles. But I can't stay silent anymore. This isn't just about me and Bill, it's about hundreds of people being manipulated and exploited in God's name. Marcus had been compiling evidence for a comprehensive exposé. His editor, Sarah Chen, received an encrypted email just hours before his death. Sarah, everything is ready. The offshore accounts, the manipulated books, the secret payments, it's all documented. But there's something else, something worse. Bill isn't just exploiting people financially. He's created a system where vulnerable people are groomed, used, and then either bought off or threatened into silence. I know because I was almost one of them. The story goes out Monday, no matter what. If anything happens to me, there's a backup of everything in a safe deposit box at First Atlanta Bank. The key is taped under my sister's cat's feeding bowl. They can destroy my laptop, but they can't bury the truth anymore. The investigation uncovered a pattern of surveillance in the weeks leading up to Marcus's death. Private security firms, paid through church funds, had been monitoring his movements. His phone had been tapped, his email hacked. Even his home security system, supposedly top of the line, had been compromised by professionals with access to church resources. Perhaps most disturbing was the evidence found in Pastor Montgomery's private study at Graceland. Behind a false panel in his bookshelf, detectives discovered a collection of files on various members of his congregation, photographs, financial records, transcripts of private counseling sessions. It was a treasure trove of blackmail material, ensuring loyalty through fear and shame. The relationship between Marcus and Pastor Montgomery wasn't just about sex or money, Detective Martinez would later testify. It was about power, manipulation, and the slow corruption of everything sacred. Marcus Thompson didn't just uncover a scandal, he exposed an entire system of exploitation hidden behind stained glass windows. On the Sunday following Marcus's death, Pastor Montgomery stood before his congregation, tears streaming down his face as he called for prayers for our dear brother in Christ, Marcus Thompson, taken from us too soon. What his followers couldn't see was the burner phone in his office, its call log showing a final connection to Marcus's phone at 9:15 p.m. on the night of the murder, just minutes before the first signs of struggle. The foundation of lies was beginning to crumble, and the weight of truth would soon bring one of Atlanta's most powerful religious institutions to its knees. But as investigators would soon discover, the relationship between Marcus Thompson and Pastor Montgomery was just the beginning of a much larger story of corruption, power, and deadly consequences. Stay with us as we continue our investigation, revealing how this explosive exposé led to one of the most shocking crimes in Atlanta's recent history. The morning of March 19, 2023, dawned clear and cold in Atlanta. It was supposed to be a typical Sunday at Graceland Megachurch, but everything changed at 6 a.m. when the Atlanta Chronicle's website published Marcus Thompson's final story. The headline read, "Sins of the Shepherd, Corruption, Exploitation, and Hidden Lives at Atlanta's Largest Megachurch." Within hours, the story went viral. National news networks picked it up, and satellite trucks began appearing in Graceland's sprawling parking lot. The article, published posthumously under Marcus's byline with additional reporting by Sarah Chen, was devastating in its detail and scope. It wasn't just about Pastor Montgomery's secret relationship with Marcus. It exposed a decades-long system of financial fraud, sexual exploitation, and institutional corruption that reached into every corner of Atlanta's religious establishment. The phone started ringing at 6:05 a.m. and didn't stop, recalled Janet Morris, Graceland's longtime receptionist. Church members, reporters, other churches, everyone wanted answers. Pastor Montgomery wasn't answering his phone, and nobody knew what to do. By 7:30 a.m., when the first congregants usually arrived for early service, the church's administrative office was in chaos. Rebecca Montgomery, the pastor's wife of 30 years, learned about her husband's double life along with the rest of the world. She had been preparing for the morning service, selecting her usual carefully coordinated outfit, when her daughter called screaming about the news. Security cameras captured her arrival at the church at 7:45 a.m., her usual composed demeanor shattered as she pushed past reporters. The 9 a.m. service was supposed to be one of Graceland's showcase events, regularly attracting over 3,000 worshipers. That morning, the massive sanctuary was barely half full. Associate Pastor David Reynolds, a young man who had been with the church for 5 years, found himself thrust into the spotlight when Pastor Montgomery failed to appear. "Brothers and sisters," Reynolds began, his voice shaking, "we gather today in a moment of crisis." He never finished the sentence. From the back of the sanctuary, a young man stood up and began shouting, "Tell them about the beach house, David. Tell them what happens at the pastor's retreats." Security quickly removed the man, but the damage was done. The carefully maintained facade was crumbling. By noon, the church parking lot had become a media circus. National news anchors delivered live reports against the backdrop of Graceland's impressive facade, while church members hurried past, heads down, avoiding cameras. Inside, the church board had convened an emergency meeting in the executive conference room. Gerald Phillips, head of the church's finance committee and a prominent Atlanta real estate developer, tried to maintain control. "We need to get ahead of this story," he insisted, according to recordings later obtained by investigators. "We have to protect the institution." But as the board members read through Marcus's article, they realized the extent of their predicament. The financial records weren't just damaging, they were criminal. The article detailed how Graceland had been operating as a sophisticated money laundering operation, using its status as a religious institution to avoid scrutiny. Church donations were filtered through a complex network of shell companies, with millions diverted to private accounts. The youth ministry's budget alone showed over $3 million in unexplained expenses over the past 5 years. Throughout the day, more victims began coming forward. Thomas Carter, a former youth pastor who had left the church 2 years earlier, posted a lengthy Facebook statement describing his own experience with Pastor Montgomery. "It always started the same way," he wrote. "Private counseling sessions, subtle touches, suggestions that your position in the church could be enhanced if you were willing to be spiritually open." By evening, the post had been shared over 50,000 times. The impact rippled through Atlanta's elite social circles. Graceland's congregation included city council members, judges, business leaders, people who had donated millions to the church and lent their names and reputations to its causes. Now they found themselves facing questions about what they knew and when they knew it. Judge Marion Hayes, who had served on Graceland's board for 15 years, submitted her resignation from the bench by Monday morning. 2 city council members who had received campaign donations from church-affiliated organizations announced they would return the funds. The mayor, who had attended Christmas services at Graceland just months earlier, issued a carefully worded statement calling for a full investigation. The congregation itself began to splinter. By Monday evening, 3 distinct factions had emerged: those who stood by Pastor Montgomery, claiming he was being persecuted, those who demanded immediate accountability and reform, and those who simply stopped coming to church entirely. The Wednesday night prayer meeting, usually attended by over 1,000 people, drew barely 50. "It's like watching a family tear itself apart," observed Dr. Rachel Martinez, a sociologist at Emory University who specializes in religious institutions. "These people didn't just share a church, they shared their lives. Their children grew up together, they celebrated weddings and mourned at funerals together. Now they're forced to question everything they believed about their spiritual home." The financial impact was immediate and severe. Several major donors publicly withdrew their support. The church's private school, which charged over $20,000 per year in tuition, faced a wave of withdrawals. By the end of the week, Graceland's staff had been reduced by 30%, and construction on a planned $12 million family life center was halted. But the most profound impact was personal. Support groups began forming among former and current church members, meeting in homes and coffee shops to share their stories. Many had similar experiences: moments of vulnerability exploited, spiritual authority abused, silence bought with promotions or threats. Linda Ramirez, who had worked as Pastor Montgomery's personal assistant for 8 years, finally felt free to speak. "There were signs everywhere," she told investigators. The private meetings that ran late into the night, the young men who would leave his office looking shell-shocked, the endless stream of gift cards and special payments authorized for certain staff members. "We all saw it, but we convinced ourselves it couldn't be what it looked like. After all, this was a man of God." The church's youth program, once considered a model for megachurches across the country, was particularly hard hit. Parents withdrew their children en masse after learning that program funds had been used to silence potential whistleblowers. The youth pastor, Michael Drake, was placed on administrative leave after multiple allegations of inappropriate behavior surfaced. Detective Martinez's investigation continued to uncover new layers of corruption. Church security cameras had been systematically disabled during certain late-night meetings. Building maintenance logs showed regular sweeps for listening devices in Pastor Montgomery's office. Even the church's IT system had been configured to automatically delete certain types of communications. The revelations forced other Atlanta churches to examine their own practices. The Atlanta Ministerial Alliance held an emergency meeting to discuss new accountability measures. Several churches announced the formation of independent oversight committees. The state attorney general's office launched investigations into 3 other megachurches with similar financial structures. By the end of March, Graceland's once mighty congregation had been reduced to a shadow of its former self. The massive parking lot stood largely empty on Sundays. The television ministry, which had reached millions, was suspended indefinitely. The charitable foundation, which had given the church so much positive publicity, was placed under external audit. Pastor Montgomery himself remained in seclusion, his whereabouts unknown to even his closest associates. His only communication was a brief statement released through his attorney: "I ask for prayers for my family and our church community during this difficult time. The truth will emerge through proper channels." But for many, the truth had already emerged through Marcus Thompson's sacrifice. His sister, Dr. Aisha Thompson, spoke at a candlelight vigil held outside the church. Marcus believed that true faith couldn't coexist with corruption and exploitation. He gave his life exposing darkness so that light could finally shine in. His death opened the door for healing and truth. The investigation into Marcus's murder was about to take a dramatic turn, as Detective Martinez discovered crucial evidence linking the crime directly to church leadership. But the impact of his final story had already achieved what he had hoped: the beginning of accountability and reform in an institution that had lost its way. Stay with us as we uncover the final pieces of this tragic puzzle, revealing how the search for Marcus Thompson's killer would lead investigators to the highest levels of religious power in Atlanta. The breakthrough in Marcus Thompson's murder investigation came on April 3, 2023, exactly 19 days after his death. Detective Sarah Martinez was reviewing security footage from a gas station 3 blocks from Marcus's home when she noticed something crucial: a black SUV with church security markings pulling in at 9:15 p.m. on the night of the murder. The driver, Michael Drake, Graceland's head of security, was seen making a call on a burner phone, the same type found in Marcus's desk drawer. It was like finding the missing piece of a puzzle, Martinez would later testify. We knew the murder had been professionally executed, but now we could see how church resources had been used to carry it out. The investigation accelerated rapidly. A search warrant executed on Drake's residence revealed a hidden safe containing $50,000 in cash, the missing laptop from Marcus's home, and most damning of all, a recorded conversation between Drake and Pastor Montgomery from March 14, 2023. "Montgomery, he has to be stopped. The story can't come out. Drake, it'll be handled. Clean, professional. No traces. Montgomery, make sure you get the laptop and any backups. Everything has to disappear. Drake, what about his phone? Montgomery, everything, Michael. Whatever it takes." The recording, made by Drake as insurance against betrayal, provided the smoking gun investigators needed. Michael Drake was arrested at 6 a.m. on April 4, 2023, as he attempted to board a flight to Mexico. Under interrogation, he quickly broke down and revealed the full scope of the conspiracy. Pastor Montgomery didn't just order the hit, Drake confessed. He orchestrated every detail. He knew Marcus's schedule, knew when he'd be alone, knew exactly what evidence needed to be destroyed. He'd been planning this for weeks, ever since Marcus refused his final attempt at bribery. That final attempt, investigators learned, had occurred on March 12, during a meeting in Pastor Montgomery's private study. Church security footage, recovered despite attempts to delete it, showed Marcus entering the study at 9:30 p.m. The meeting lasted 2 hours. "He offered me $5 million, Marcus had written in his final journal entry, found in the safe deposit box with his evidence backups. Said it could be transferred offshore immediately, untraceable. When I refused, he switched tactics, threatened to expose my family's immigration history, my sister's medical license issues, everything. He had files on all of us. But he didn't understand, this was never about money. This was about justice." With Drake in custody and the recording and evidence, the net began closing around Pastor Montgomery. But the pastor had disappeared. His wife Rebecca, now cooperating with investigators, revealed that he had multiple fake passports and offshore accounts ready for such an emergency. An international manhunt was launched. The investigation also revealed the full extent of the church's security apparatus. Under Drake's leadership, Graceland had assembled a sophisticated surveillance operation, monitoring not just church staff but also prominent members of the congregation. The files in Montgomery's study proved to be just the tip of the iceberg. It was a complete intelligence operation, explained FBI Special Agent Jennifer Woods, who joined the investigation. They had dirt on judges, politicians, business leaders, anyone who could potentially threaten the church's interests. The surveillance budget alone was over $2 million annually, all hidden in various ministry program accounts. On April 15, 2023, Pastor William Montgomery was located in a luxury resort in Bali, Indonesia. Local authorities, working with Interpol, arrested him during a pre-dawn raid. He had been traveling under the name James Wilson and had withdrawn over $3 million from various offshore accounts in the preceding weeks. The arrest was dramatic. Montgomery, no longer the polished religious leader, was found in the company of a young male escort, with cocaine and various illicit substances in his room. The man who had preached against moral decay on Sunday mornings had been living a life of excess and debauchery while on the run. Back in Atlanta, the case was building. The district attorney's office, led by veteran prosecutor Maria Rodriguez, assembled a massive indictment, first-degree murder, ordering the hit on Marcus: conspiracy to commit murder, money laundering, over $50 million through church accounts, tax evasion, $12 million in unreported income, racketeering under RICO statutes, sexual exploitation, multiple victims, witness tampering, blackmail, and extortion. The trial began on September 12, 2023, in the Fulton County Courthouse. The prosecution's case was overwhelming. Over 6 weeks, more than 60 witnesses testified about the culture of corruption, exploitation, and fear that Montgomery had created at Graceland. Former church members revealed how Montgomery had used his position to groom vulnerable individuals, particularly young men from troubled backgrounds. Church financial records showed how hush money had been disguised as ministry stipends or educational grants. IT specialists detailed the sophisticated systems used to monitor and control church members. Perhaps the most powerful testimony came from Thomas Carter, the former youth pastor who had first spoken out after Marcus's murder. His testimony about Montgomery's pattern of exploitation brought many in the courtroom to tears. He would start by offering spiritual guidance, then emotional support, then physical comfort. Before you knew it, you were trapped. If you tried to pull away, he'd remind you of your past mistakes, your family's secrets, things you'd told him in confidence. The whole church structure was designed to make you dependent on his approval and terrified of his disapproval. The defense, led by high-profile attorney James Morton, attempted to portray Montgomery as a victim of his own success, a man who had lost his way under the pressures of leading a massive institution. They tried to argue that Marcus's death was the result of Drake acting alone, without Montgomery's knowledge or approval. But the evidence was insurmountable. The recorded conversation between Montgomery and Drake. The financial records. The surveillance files. The testimony of dozens of victims. Most damaging was Montgomery's own journal, discovered in his Bali resort room, in which he had meticulously documented his manipulations and conquests, treating them as achievements rather than sins. On October 25, 2023, after just 6 hours of deliberation, the jury returned their verdict: guilty on all counts. Judge Maria Sanchez, herself a former member of Graceland's congregation, delivered the sentence: life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 125 years for the other charges. Michael Drake, having cooperated with prosecutors, received a 40-year sentence. Several other church officials faced lesser charges for their roles in the financial crimes and cover-ups. The church's board of directors was completely dissolved, and Graceland itself was placed under court-supervised receivership. The aftermath of the trial brought both healing and reform. The new leadership at Graceland, headed by Reverend Dr. James Wilson, an African-American pastor known for his work in social justice, implemented sweeping changes: independent financial oversight, mandatory reporting of all suspicious activities, professional counseling services for victims, complete transparency in church operations, new policies preventing any individual from accumulating too much power, regular external audits. Marcus Thompson's legacy extended far beyond Graceland. His investigation and tragic death led to new state legislation requiring greater financial transparency from religious institutions, the formation of a support network for victims of religious exploitation, a nationwide examination of mega-church governance structures, the establishment of the Marcus Thompson Fellowship for Investigative Religious Journalism. On the first anniversary of Marcus's death, his sister Aisha stood before a gathering at the newly renamed Thompson Memorial Garden. Formerly Graceland's prayer garden, Marcus knew the risks, but he believed that truth was worth any price. His work exposed not just one corrupt leader, but a system that enabled abuse and exploitation in God's name. His death opened the door for countless victims to find their voices and for true healing to begin. The story of Marcus Thompson and Graceland Megachurch serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of accountability, transparency, and courage in confronting institutional corruption. It demonstrates how one person's dedication to truth can transform an entire community and bring light to the darkest corners of power. As Detective Sarah Martinez reflected in her final case report, Marcus Thompson didn't just solve a crime, he exposed a system. His death wasn't just murder, it was martyrdom in the cause of truth. In the end, he accomplished exactly what he set out to do. He forced us all to confront the difference between genuine faith and the exploitation of belief. Today, the former Graceland complex houses not only a Reformed congregation but also a center for religious accountability and healing. Marcus Thompson's picture hangs in the entrance hall, alongside his final written words, "The truth has a cost, but silence costs more."